I gave up everything to bring my son to America. I worked through the night. I swallowed humiliation in silence. I wore the same shoes for 11 years so that he could have a future I never had. And then one afternoon, in the store where I had worked for over a decade, a boy laughed at my accent in front of a crowd of strangers. I looked at my son, expecting to find him standing beside me. He was standing beside them. What happened next changed both of our lives in ways I never expected, because the real story was not about that boy who laughed or the words I finally said out loud after years of silence. The real story was about what I discovered after, about my son, about myself, and about the dangerous difference between sacrificing for someone and truly knowing them. I thought I had lost my son that day. What I did not know was that I was just beginning to find him. There is a kind of silence that only a mother knows. Not the peaceful kind. Not the kind that comes after a good meal or a long prayer. I am talking about the silence that lives inside your chest when you realize that the child you crossed an ocean for, the child you bled and starved and humiliated yourself for, is ashamed of you. I did not understand that silence right away. It took me years. It took me a grocery store on a Tuesday afternoon, fluorescent lights overhead, strangers watching, and the sound of my own son's laughter cutting through me like something cold and sharp. But I will get to that. First, let me tell you where it all began. Because a wound like this does not start on the day it opens. It starts much earlier. It starts in a small apartment, in a country that is not yours, on a night when you are so tired you cannot even cry. I came to the United States when my son, Arjun, was 4 years old. His father had come a year before us, working in a cousin's restaurant in New Jersey, saving money, sleeping in a room with 3 other men. We were not wealthy people. We were not even what you would call comfortable. We were the kind of family that counts every rupee twice before spending it once. So when the opportunity came, when the visa was approved and the ticket was bought, I did not feel joy. I felt terror, but I also felt something else, a stubborn, quiet kind of hope. The hope that my son would not have to count the way I had counted. That he would walk through doors I could only press my face against. The first winter nearly broke me. I had never felt cold like that before. Not real cold. The kind that enters your bones and stays there. I did not have a proper coat. The one I had bought in Delhi was not built for American January. I remember standing at a bus stop at 5:30 in the morning, waiting for a bus that would take me to a cleaning job, and thinking that perhaps I had made a terrible mistake. My hands were inside my sleeves. My breath came out in white clouds. Around me, the world was completely silent, completely dark, completely indifferent to whether I lived or died. But I did not go back. That is the thing about women like me. We do not go back. I worked 3 jobs in those first 2 years. During the day, I assisted at a laundry service, folding other people's clothes, pressing other people's shirts, making other people's lives neat and clean. In the evenings, I helped at a catering company run by a Gujarati family who were kind but busy, too busy to be truly kind. And 3 nights a week, from midnight to 4 in the morning, I cleaned a grocery store, the same grocery store where, more than a decade later, my life would publicly fall apart. Arjun stayed with a neighbor woman, an older Bangladeshi lady named Mrs. Akhtar, who charged us very little and who smelled of mustard oil and cardamom, which made me feel in small moments less far from home. He was a quiet child then, a good child. He liked to draw pictures of animals and line them up on the windowsill. He called me every name he knew for mother, Amma, Ma, Mummy, as if one word was never enough. I would come home in the early morning, while it was still dark, and I would sit beside his sleeping body on the mattress we shared, and I would press my forehead against his small back and breathe. Just breathe. That was enough then. That was everything. My husband, Rajan, was a gentle man but not a strong one. I say this without cruelty, only with truth. He worked hard, but he also grew tired in a different way than I did. Where exhaustion made me harder, it made him softer, more distant, more uncertain. By the time Arjun was 7, Rajan had begun to spend more evenings with his cousin's group of friends, playing cards, watching cricket, disappearing into the small Indian world that had formed inside our neighborhood. I understood it. I even felt it myself, the need to be somewhere familiar, somewhere your accent does not make people tilt their heads and ask you to repeat yourself, But I could not afford that luxury. I did not have time for it, so I worked. And Arjun grew. The grocery store eventually hired me full-time when Arjun was 9. I became a cashier, then a shift supervisor, then, after 7 years, an assistant manager. It was not glamorous. It was long hours and difficult customers, and a manager named Brian who spoke to me slowly, as if the problem was not my English, but my hearing. But it was stable. It was mine. And every paycheck I received, I divided carefully. Rent, food, Arjun's school supplies, a small amount to send home to my mother in Hyderabad, and a small amount into a savings account I had opened with the goal of one day paying for Arjun's college. I did not spend money on myself. I wore the same 4 pairs of shoes for 11 years. I ate the cheapest lunch possible. I did not buy new saris unless an old one tore past repair. People who saw me at work probably thought I was simply frugal. They did not know that every rupee I did not spend on myself was a brick in the wall I was building around my son's future. And for a long time, Arjun saw that. He was a sensitive boy, perceptive. He knew, even without words, what I was doing. When he was in middle school, he would sometimes come to the store after school and sit at the break room table doing his homework while I finished my shift. He would draw those same animals he had drawn as a child, and he would show them to me. And his face when I praised him, that face was the whole reason I was alive. But something shifted when he entered high school, not all at once. Gradually, the way a river changes course, slowly, almost invisibly, until one day you look and realize the water is going somewhere entirely different. He stopped speaking Telugu at home first. I thought nothing of it. His English was better, naturally. He had grown up here after all. Then he stopped wanting me to pack Indian food for his lunch. Then he asked me quietly and without meeting my eyes if I could please not wear my salwar kameez when I dropped him at school. He said it was because it would make him late, but we both knew that was not true. I told myself it was adolescence. Every mother tells herself this. Every mother is partly right and partly terribly wrong. I told myself he would come back to himself, that the American skin he was growing was just protection, just armor, and underneath it, my son, the boy who lined animals on the windowsill, who called me every name for mother, was still there, intact, waiting. I held that belief the way you hold a glass that has already cracked, carefully, desperately, pretending it is whole. Then came the afternoon in the store, and the glass finally shattered. I have replayed that Tuesday afternoon in my mind so many times that it no longer feels like a memory. It feels like a scar, something permanently written into the surface of me, visible only when the light hits a certain way. It was a regular shift. Nothing about the morning suggested that by evening, my world would look different. I had arrived at 7, as always, done my supervisor walkthrough, checked the produce section, approved 2 schedule changes, and by early afternoon I was covering the register during a busy spell because one of my cashiers had called in sick. I did not mind. I had done this hundreds of times. Standing at that register was familiar in the way that certain worn things become familiar. Not comfortable exactly, but known. My body knew where to stand, how to angle the scanner, how to smile at strangers with the right amount of warmth that is professional but not personal. I was in the middle of helping an elderly woman with her coupons when I heard the doors open and a group of boys come in. I did not look up immediately, but I knew my son's laugh before I saw his face. A mother always does. It is coded into you somewhere ancient and cellular, the specific frequency of the laughter of the child who once lived inside your body. I looked up. Arjun was with 4 boys I did not recognize. They were tall, easy in their bodies, the way American boys often are, wearing the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having had to translate yourself. They were joking about something, pushing each other lightly, filling the entrance of the store with noise and youth, and that specific energy of boys who have not yet learned how much the world can diminish them. Arjun saw me a half second after I saw him. His face changed. It was fast, the kind of change that happens in the space between one heartbeat and the next, so fast that if you did not know his face the way I knew it, you would have missed it entirely. But I caught it, a flicker, a closing. Like a curtain being pulled quickly across a window that had, just for a moment, been open. He gave me a small, tight nod, the kind you give to someone you acknowledge, but do not claim. I smiled at him. I could not help it. Even then, even with that nod landing in my chest like a small, cold stone, I smiled at my son, because I am his mother, because that is what I do. The boys drifted into the snack aisle. I went back to the elderly woman's coupons. I thought, perhaps, that was all it would be. A brief, slightly painful moment, the kind that had become familiar over the past 2 years of his high school life. I thought he would buy whatever he came for and leave, and I would finish my shift and drive home and heat up the dal I had made that morning. And we would sit across from each other at the kitchen table the way we always did, in a silence that had been growing heavier, yes, but was still, somehow, ours. I thought I knew how the afternoon would go. I did not know. About 20 minutes later, the boys came to the register with chips, drinks, and a large bag of pretzels. I recognized one of them from a photograph Arjun had shown me months ago. A boy named Connor, or Colin. I was not certain, with pale blue eyes and the kind of easy grin that people mistake for kindness. He placed the items on the belt and looked at me with that grin and said something to the others in a low voice. They laughed. I did not hear what he said. I told myself it was nothing. I began scanning the items. Then he spoke louder, directly at me this time, with a tone that was not cruel exactly. It was worse than cruel. It was playful, as if what he was about to do was simply entertainment, as harmless as a joke between friends. He said, "Hey, can you say the total again? You sound like those guys in the tech support commercials. It's hilarious." The store did not go silent all at once. It went silent the way a room goes cold, gradually and then completely. The woman behind them in line stopped moving. My cashier 2 registers down looked over. The bag boy near the door, a young man named Marcus, who had worked there 2 years, turned his head, and I felt it. That old familiar heat, the one I had felt 100 times in 11 years, the one that starts at the base of your neck and moves upward, behind your ears, across your face. The humiliation that I had trained myself over a decade to swallow. I had become so skilled at swallowing it. I had a system. You breathe, you smile, you say the total again, clearly, and you hand them the receipt, and you call the next customer, and you do not let it touch the real you, the you that exists beneath the uniform, beneath the accent, beneath the exhaustion. I breathed. I looked at the boy, and then I looked at my son. Arjun was standing slightly behind the group, holding a bottle of juice, and he was, God help me, he was smiling, not broadly, not cruelly, but he was smiling. The smile of someone who is embarrassed and does not know what else to do with his face. The smile of someone who has chosen, in this precise moment, to be part of the group that is laughing rather than the son of the woman being laughed at. Something in me came apart. I have thought about this moment often since then. I have asked myself whether what I did was right, whether it was wise, whether a calmer woman, a more strategic woman, would have simply swallowed it one more time and spoken to her son privately later. I have had these conversations with myself at 3 a.m, in the dark, on many nights, and honestly, I still do not have a clean answer. All I know is that I am human, and I had been swallowing for 11 years, and on that particular Tuesday afternoon, standing under those fluorescent lights, I could not swallow anymore. I set down the scanner. I straightened up. I am not a tall woman. I am ordinary in almost every physical way, but something in how I stood must have shifted because the boy's grin flickered, just slightly. I spoke slowly, clearly, in the best English I have ever spoken in my life. I said, "My English may not be perfect. It is my 3rd language, after Telugu and Hindi. I learned it as an adult, in a country that was not mine, while working night shifts and raising a child alone. If it makes you laugh, I understand. It is easier to laugh at something than to respect it. But I want you to know that this accent you find so funny has put food on tables, paid school fees, and built something from nothing in a country that did not make it easy. You are welcome to find that funny, but I will not apologize for it." The store was fully silent now. My hands were trembling. I could feel it. My palms against the edge of the register counter, shaking slightly. My heart was beating so loudly I was almost certain the people near me could hear it. The boy said nothing. His friends said nothing. Even the easy grin was gone, replaced by something uncertain, something young and slightly exposed. And for a moment, just a moment, he looked like what he actually was. A teenager who had gone too far and now did not know the way back. I printed the receipt, placed it on the counter, said, "Have a good evening," in the same clear voice. They left. Marcus, the bag boy by the door, started clapping. Slowly at first. Then the woman behind them in line joined. Then someone else. It was not a standing ovation. It was quiet and real and completely unexpected. And it undid me in a way that the humiliation itself had not. My eyes filled with tears that I absolutely refused to let fall. I pressed my fingernails into my palm and looked at the next customer and said, "Hello, did you find everything okay?" And I continued working. Because that is what I do. I did not see Arjun leave the store. When my shift ended 2 hours later, I found him waiting by my car in the parking lot. I had hoped, in those 2 hours, that what I would find when I looked at my son's face was something like pride, something like the recognition that his mother, who he had seen diminished and silent for years, had finally spoken, that he would look at me the way he used to look at me when he was small, as if I was something remarkable. Instead, his face was closed, tight, angry in the particular way of a teenage boy who has decided that his own discomfort is the most important thing in the room. We drove for several minutes in silence. Then he said it. He said, "You humiliated me in front of my friends." I kept my eyes on the road, my hands on the wheel. I counted 3 breaths before I trusted myself to speak. I said, "I humiliated you." Not a question, just the words, repeated back, so that we could both hear them in the air between us. He said yes. He said I had made a scene. He said that Connor, so it was Connor, was actually not a bad person, that I had overreacted, that I always made everything dramatic, that I never understood how things worked here. Here. After 11 years, I still lived somewhere that my own son called here as if I were a visitor. I did not respond. I could not. Because the thing that was happening inside my chest was too large and too tangled to become words. It was grief and fury and love and devastation, all pressed together into something that had no name in Telugu or Hindi or English. I pulled into our parking spot, turned off the engine, sat. Arjun got out of the car and went inside without looking back. I sat in that car for a long time, long enough for the parking lot lights to come on, long enough for the families around me to finish their evenings, come home, close their doors. I sat, and I thought about the 4-year-old boy who had pressed his face against the airplane window and pointed at the clouds and asked me if America was up there, among them. I thought about the fact that I had said yes. I thought about how sure I had been. There is a particular kind of loneliness that does not announce itself. It does not arrive the way grief arrives, sudden, loud, impossible to ignore. It arrives the way water seeps into old walls, slowly, quietly, until one day you press your hand against what you thought was solid, and you find that everything beneath the surface has already softened and given way. That is what the weeks after the grocery store felt like. Arjun and I did not have a large fight. We did not scream at each other. We did not throw words like weapons across a room. What happened was quieter and, in many ways, more damaging than any shouting match could have been. We simply withdrew from each other, into ourselves, into the careful, polite distance of 2 people who share a home but have stopped sharing anything that matters. He went to school. He came home. He ate dinner with his eyes on his phone. He said goodnight without looking at me. He existed in the apartment the way a person exists in a waiting room, present but elsewhere, counting the minutes until he could be somewhere else entirely. I told myself to give him time. He was 17. 17-year-old boys are difficult creatures even in the best of circumstances, and our circumstances were not the best. I told myself that this was a phase, the way I had told myself so many things were phases over the years. I was running out of things to call phases. Rajan noticed something was different, but he did not ask directly. This was his way, to observe from a careful distance, to sense the weather without wanting to stand in the rain. He asked me once, at the end of a quiet dinner, whether Arjun seemed all right to me. I said yes. He nodded, as if he had expected that answer, and asked nothing further. This, too, had become our pattern. We had learned, over the years in America, how to live beside each other's pain without touching it. I began to do something I had never done before. I began to watch my son from a distance, the way you watch someone you are afraid of losing, studying the small things, cataloging them, as if understanding the details might somehow help you hold on to the whole. I noticed the music he listened to through his headphones. I noticed the friends he mentioned, always by American names, never by the Indian names of the few Desi kids at his school. I noticed that the small framed photograph of my mother that I kept on the living room shelf, a photograph Arjun had, as a child, sometimes kissed goodnight, had been moved, turned slightly, so it faced more toward the wall than the room. I did not move it back. I am not sure why. Perhaps because moving it back felt like a confrontation I did not have the strength for. Perhaps because I wanted to see whether he would notice that I had noticed. He never did. About 3 weeks after the grocery store incident, I received a phone call from his school. Not from a teacher, from a counselor, a woman named Mrs. Fitzgerald, with a soft voice and the careful phrasing of someone trained to deliver difficult information gently. She said that Arjun had come to speak with her. She said he had expressed that he was experiencing significant stress at home, that there were cultural and communication tensions that were affecting his well-being. She used the phrase cultural and communication tensions twice. The second time, I wrote it down on the back of a receipt that was sitting near the telephone, in the small handwriting I use when I want to remember something exactly. I still have that receipt somewhere. I have never thrown it away. Mrs. Fitzgerald said she wanted to suggest family counseling. She said it very kindly, very carefully, framing it as a resource rather than a judgment. She said that many families navigating the experience of immigration found it useful to have a professional space to work through these dynamics. She said the word dynamics, the way people say words they have chosen specifically because they are less frightening than the words they mean. I thanked her. I wrote down the name of the counseling service she recommended. I told her I would discuss it with my husband. When I hung up the phone, I stood in the kitchen for a very long time. The dal was simmering on the stove. The ceiling fan made its familiar sound, slightly uneven, a rhythm I had learned to sleep through. Outside the window, a neighbor's child was riding a bicycle in the parking lot, going in careful, determined circles. My son had gone to a stranger to speak about me. I want to be fair when I describe what I felt in that moment, because it was not simple. It was not only hurt, though it was deeply hurt. It was also something more complicated, a kind of horrified understanding, because as I stood there, I thought about what Arjun must have said to Mrs. Fitzgerald. I thought about his version of our story, and I realized, with a discomfort that I did not want to feel, that his version was real too, that it existed alongside mine, equally true, equally painful, and that I had never once asked him to tell it to me. I had spent 11 years telling myself I was building something for him, and I had never asked him whether he wanted what I was building. That thought did not make me feel wise. It made me feel sick. I spoke to Rajan that evening. This was, perhaps, the most honest conversation we had shared in 2 years. I told him about the phone call. I told him what Mrs. Fitzgerald had said. I watched his face as I spoke, watched him absorb it, process it, set it somewhere inside himself. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something I did not expect. He said, "We never asked him how he felt about any of it." I said, "He is our son. We sacrificed everything for him." Rajan said, "Yes, but we never asked him if he wanted to be the reason for the sacrifice." I had no answer for that. I sat with it the way you sit with something too heavy to carry and too important to put down. The next morning, I knocked on Arjun's bedroom door before he left for school. He opened it with the cautious expression he had been wearing around me for weeks, a face that was prepared for conflict, braced for it. I could see him organizing his defenses even as he looked at me. I did not say what I had planned to say. I had planned to say that I had spoken to Mrs. Fitzgerald and that we needed to talk, that I had been patient long enough, that he owed me an honest conversation. I had rehearsed these words in my mind all night. Instead, standing in his doorway, looking at his 17-year-old face, a face that had my eyes and his father's forehead and a jaw that had become, somewhere in the past year, a man's jaw, I said something entirely different. I said, "Tell me what it has been like for you, growing up here. Tell me honestly. I will listen, and I will not interrupt, and I will not cry." I broke the third promise almost immediately, but I kept the first two. What he told me, over the next 45 minutes, sitting on the edge of his bed while I sat on his desk chair, was not what I had expected. It was harder than what I had expected, and more human than I had given him credit for. He did not say he was ashamed of me. What he said, haltingly, with the vocabulary of a boy who had felt something enormous for a long time but had never tried to put it into words before, was that he felt like he was always in the middle, always translating, not language, but entire worlds, that at school he was the Indian kid, and at home he was failing at being Indian enough, that he did not feel fully belonging anywhere, that the grocery store moment had terrified him not because he was ashamed of me, but because in that moment he had seen, with awful clarity, that he did not know how to exist in both worlds at once, and that this failure felt like his fault in a way he could not explain. He said, "When he laughed at you, I didn't know what to do, and because I didn't know what to do, I did the wrong thing, and I've hated myself for it every day since. I had promised I would not cry. I broke that promise completely, and without apology. We did not fix everything in that conversation. You do not fix 11 years of distance in 45 minutes. But something shifted, something that had been locked, that I had felt locked for so long that I had stopped noticing how much energy I was using to push against it, opened, not fully, just enough to let in light. I told him for the first time about the bus stop in January, about my hands inside my sleeves in the dark, about the thought I had that morning, that perhaps I had made a terrible mistake, and the decision to stay anyway. I had never told him this story. I had protected him from it, the way I had protected him from so many things, believing that protection was the same as love. I was beginning to understand that it was not the same, that sometimes protection looks like love but functions like a wall. He listened. He asked questions. He asked what the bus had looked like, what the street was called, whether I had been scared. These small, specific questions broke my heart in the best possible way, because they meant he wanted to see it. He wanted to see me, not as his mother the symbol, not as his mother the sacrifice, but as a person who had stood at a bus stop in the dark and been afraid and stayed anyway. By the time we finished talking, he was late for school. He called the front office from his phone to let them know. And then, before he left, he did something he had not done in almost 2 years. He hugged me. Not the brief, obligatory hug of a teenage boy fulfilling a social contract. A real hug. The kind where you can feel the other person's breathing. I held on longer than I should have. He let me. I thought, as I stood in the hallway after he had gone, that perhaps we had turned something, that perhaps the worst of it was behind us, that the grocery store moment, as painful as it had been, had cracked something open that needed to be cracked, and that what was coming now was the slow, difficult, necessary work of finding each other again. I thought that. I was wrong, because I did not yet know about the letter. The letter arrived on a Friday. I know it was a Friday because I had just finished the longest shift of my week, open to close, 11 hours, the kind of day that leaves you with sore feet and a particular emptiness behind the eyes. I had stopped at the mailbox on my way up to the apartment, the way I always did, pulling out the small stack of envelopes without really looking at them, holding them against my chest as I climbed the stairs. I sorted through them at the kitchen counter. A utility bill, a circular from the pharmacy, a letter from Arjun's school. I almost set it aside for Rajan to open. School correspondence often had to do with finances, tuition support paperwork, activity fee reminders, and Rajan handled those things. But something about the weight of the envelope made me stop. It was heavier than a reminder notice, thicker. I opened it. It was a letter from the school's academic office, addressed to both parents, informing us that Arjun had submitted an application for an early residential program at a university in California, a full academic year program for exceptional students, beginning the following September. He had applied without telling us. He had submitted teacher recommendations, an academic portfolio, and a personal essay. The letter was informing us not to ask our permission. That stage had apparently passed, but to notify us that he had been accepted. He had been accepted, and he had not said a single word. I read the letter 3 times, standing at the kitchen counter. Then I sat down on the floor. Not because my legs gave out, though they felt as though they might, but because sitting down on the floor felt like the only honest response to what I was holding in my hands. The floor felt appropriate, solid, real. My son had been quietly planning to leave. While we had been having our careful conversations, while I had been telling myself that things were shifting, that we had turned something, that the hug in the hallway meant we were beginning, he had already, months before any of that, been building an exit. I did not tell Rajan that night. I folded the letter and put it in my bag, and I heated up dinner, and I sat at the table, and I ate, and I said the normal things, and I went to bed. I lay in the dark, listening to Rajan's breathing slow into sleep, and I stared at the ceiling for hours, thinking thoughts that had no clean shape, not rage, not grief, but something in between, something that felt like standing in a room and watching the walls move outward, the space growing larger and larger until you realize you are not in a room anymore. You are simply standing in open air, and there are no walls at all. I spoke to Arjun the next morning. I waited until Rajan had left for his shift. I needed this to be between the two of us first. I placed the letter on the table between us, and I sat across from him, and I said nothing. I let him read my face. He knew immediately what it was. He had been waiting for this, I could see it, the way his body went still, the way his jaw set. He had been carrying this secret, and now it had arrived, and there was a particular relief in his stillness, underneath the fear. The relief of something finally being in the open. He said, "I was going to tell you." I said, "When?" He said, "When it felt like the right time." I asked him whether there was going to be a right time, or whether he had hoped to leave the right time vague enough that it never quite arrived. He did not answer that. He looked at the table. I asked him why he had applied without telling us. He said, "Because I knew you would make it about sacrifice. You would say how much you had given up, how much you needed me here, and I would feel so guilty that I would not go. And I need to go." Those last 4 words landed in the room with a weight entirely disproportionate to their size. I need to go. I sat with them for a long moment before I spoke again, and what I sat with, in that moment, was the uncomfortable recognition that he was not entirely wrong. If he had come to me months ago and said, "Mother, I want to apply for a program across the country, a full year away, I want to leave," I do not know what I would have said. I want to believe I would have been graceful. I want to believe I would have immediately said, "Go. This is what I worked for. This is the whole point." But the honest truth is that I do not know. The honest truth is that somewhere inside me, alongside the pride and the love, there lived a fear I had never fully examined. The fear that if my son left, if he truly and completely stepped into the life I had built for him, then the life I had lived in the building of it would somehow be over, that I would have finished my purpose and have nothing left to be. I had crossed an ocean for him. I had made myself small for him. I had swallowed humiliation and cold and exhaustion and loneliness, and I had told myself it was for him. It was all for him. It was love in the only form I knew how to give it. And now he was sitting across from me, telling me he needed to go. And I realized that all those years I had thought I was setting him free, I had also, without knowing it, been holding on. I got up from the table. I went to the window. Outside, the neighborhood was doing its Saturday morning things. A man washing his car, 2 children on bicycles, a woman hanging something on a small balcony across the way, the ordinary, indifferent world going about its business. I stood there for what felt like a very long time. Then I said, without turning around, "Tell me about the program." A silence. Then I heard the chair shift, and then my son began to talk. He talked for nearly an hour. About the program, a specialized science and mathematics curriculum, residential, attached to a university, one of only 40 students accepted from across the country. About the professors, about what he hoped to study, about the particular branch of engineering that had fascinated him since he was 14, that he had never told me about because he had assumed I would not understand it, and which he now explained with a precision and a passion that made me feel, simultaneously, deeply proud and deeply ashamed that I had not known. I had not known because I had not asked. I had been so busy providing that I had forgotten to be curious. As he talked, something rearranged itself inside me. It was not painless. It was the kind of rearranging that feels like loss even when it is actually growth, like a bone that was set wrong, being reset correctly, which hurts more than the original break, but leaves you more whole. I turned around when he finished. I looked at my son, this tall, complicated, brilliant, lost, found, frightened, brave person who had somehow grown up in the years I had been looking the other way, doing the accounts, counting the rupees, building the wall around his future, without ever asking him to draw me a map of what he wanted it to look like. I said, "I am sorry I did not ask sooner." He blinked. This was not what he had expected. I said, "I am sorry that I made my sacrifice so loud that there was no room for your voice. I thought I was doing everything right. I thought working and providing and staying was enough. I did not understand that you also needed me to be present in a different way. I was here every day, and I was also very far away, and that is my failure, not yours." He started to say something. I held up my hand gently. I said, "I am not finished. I am also going to say this. I am proud of you in a way I do not have adequate words for, in Telugu or Hindi or English. You are going to go to California. You are going to do this thing, and I am going to call you every week, and you are going to answer, and you are going to tell me about the engineering that I do not understand. And I am going to listen even when I am lost, because listening is something I am going to get better at." He was crying before I finished. My son, who was nearly a man, was sitting at our kitchen table crying in the way he had not cried since he was small enough to fit entirely in my arms. I went to him, and I held his head against my chest the way I had held it when he was 4 years old, pressing his face against the airplane window, pointing at clouds. We stayed like that for a long time. There is more to tell. There are the weeks that followed, the difficult conversation with Rajan, who surprised me by being the most graceful of all of us about it, who said simply that a father who had crossed an ocean could hardly object to a son who crossed a country. There is the morning we drove Arjun to the airport, the three of us together, and the way he hugged Rajan first and then turned to me and said something in Telugu, haltingly, imperfectly, with an accent that was neither fully Indian nor fully American, but entirely his own, something he had not spoken in years. There are the weekly phone calls that I made good on my promise to have, during which he has, in fact, explained to me the engineering that I do not understand, and I have listened, and occasionally understood more than either of us expected. There is also the afternoon, about 4 months after he left, when I was working my shift at the grocery store, and a woman came through my register, an Indian woman, clearly new, visibly disoriented in the specific way of someone still learning how a different country works. She had counted out her money wrong. She was embarrassed. The man behind her in line sighed loudly and checked his watch. I looked at that woman. I looked at the particular shape of her embarrassment, which I recognized the way you recognize your own reflection. I said to the man behind her, in the same clear voice I had used months before, "She has it. Give her a moment." He said nothing. The woman looked at me. I smiled at her. Not the professional smile, not the customer service smile, but the real one. The one that says, "I see you. I have been where you are. You will be all right." She smiled back. And I thought of my son, 4 years old, face pressed against airplane glass. I thought of the clouds. I thought, yes, America is up there, among them, but it is also here, in this store, in these hands, in this accent that is my third language, learned in the dark, at a bus stop, in January, when I was cold and frightened, and chose to stay anyway. It is in everything I survived before he was old enough to see it. And one day, when he is older and has his own impossible love to carry, he will understand that the greatest thing I ever gave him was not the sacrifice. It was the staying, was the